Hi, everyone. Happy New Year's to everyone, and welcome back to Life of a Business Manager podcast. This is the podcast where we break down the real world skills every business manager needs to succeed. I'm your host, Sina Chan, and I'm really excited about today's episode, everyone, because we're kicking off a two-part series on how to get started with creating your own podcast in 2026. Part one is Start Your Podcast in 2026, quick guide to niche ideas, equipment, and episode planning. Part two is Launch and Grow Your Podcast in 2026, record, publish, promote, and get listeners fast. We're diving into this topic because it's been coming up a lot lately for me. And if you're anything like me, you may have set yourself some New Year's goals. And maybe one of them is starting a podcast of your own. In this part one series, we're going to talk about defining your podcast, choosing your podcast, getting your podcast equipment, and writing your episode outline. I really hope that this episode helps anyone out there listening because I've been hosting Life of a Business Manager podcast for almost a year now. And I wanted to take some time just to share why I started, what I've learned along the way, and why I truly believe if you have an interesting topic, perspective, or experience, you should consider starting your own show. So take some notes. Let's get into the episode, and I hope you get some ideas to start your own podcast in 2026. Okay, everyone, before we get into the meat of this part one series of how to create your own podcast, let's go into segment one, which is why 2026 is the perfect time for you to start a podcast. So honestly, starting a podcast in 2026 has never been easier. With AI doing a lot of the heavy lifting for you, you don't need to be super technical or have a big setup just to get started. You don't need a fancy studio, expensive equipment, or a whole production team. And the cool thing is, people are still listening to podcasts, especially the niche ones in general. When I first started Life of a Business Manager podcast, I had no clue what I was doing. I didn't have the right mic. I definitely wasn't great at editing. I didn't even know how to edit. And honestly, I wasn't even sure anyone would listen to my voice. But I kept noticing that people at work were asking me the same type of questions over and over, or my family, friends about workload, leadership, burnout, career growth. So instead of overthinking it, I just started recording and started releasing episodes. What really surprised me was realizing people were actually looking for this type of content. So if you've got experience, stories, or lessons that you're already sharing with your coworkers, your family, or friends, trust me, there's an audience out there that's willing to listen to you. I didn't start this podcast knowing where it would go. It's been almost a year now, but it's just getting started. It's opened doors to meet so many different people. And I never expected that there would be listeners at all or this many listeners. Sometimes you really just have to just trust yourself, go with your instinct, and just hit the record button. And you'll figure it out as you go. Okay, everyone. Now that you heard why 2026 is the best time to start a podcast, let's go into segment two, which is defining your podcast purpose and selecting your specific niche. So before you even think about picking up a microphone, the biggest thing you need is clarity within yourself. Seriously, just pause for a few seconds and ask yourself some questions before you define your podcast or select your specific niche. Some of the questions to ask yourself are, why are you starting this podcast in the first place? Who are you actually talking to when you hit the record button? What problem are you hoping to solve? And what makes your show different from all the others already out there? Because we all know there's so many podcasts about every single different types of topic. So when I first started Life of a Business Manager podcast, I had to get really honest with myself about this whole creation. I knew I didn't want to just create another generic business podcast. And I'm not saying every business podcast is generic. This is just what I was thinking out loud. I wanted a space where we could talk about what really happens behind the scenes, such as operations, leadership challenges, burnout, career growth, and what this role as a business manager actually looks like day to day, especially in the healthcare operations. So once I nailed the focus, everything else got easier. Coming up with episode ideas got easier, shaping the content, and even helping the right listeners find the show. And here's the key takeaway that I've learned. The more specific you are, the easier it is to grow. When you get clear with your idea and your specific niche, you target the right audience and it does the marketing for you. And it keeps you from trying to speak to everyone. You're trying to get a specific niche because there's so much competition in the podcast world, and everyone is talking about very similar topics as well. So you're trying to figure out what niche is going to attract the audience that you want to attract. Okay, everyone, now that you've defined your podcast and select your specific niche, let's go into segment 3, which is choosing your podcast format and structure. Going into 2020, formats that are really working are actually pretty familiar, but each one brings something a little different to the table. So let's go over the 4 different types of podcast format structure that might work for you. So the first type of format is solo episodes. That's where you're teaching, sharing stories, or breaking things down on your own. For Life of a Business Manager podcast, our solo episodes actually do really well, especially the how to ones. Now, I will be honest with everyone listening, these usually take me the longest to record. You're writing your own script, you're recording it, you're editing it, and then you're releasing it. It's a lot of work. It is worth it at the end because I've noticed that the how to episodes work for us on this podcast, but I will say it's a lot of work. So just be prepared to do the work. The second type of format structure are interview episodes. This is when you bring on industry leaders or expert to come on your podcast and you do an interview. From my experience, when I do interview episodes, there's definitely prep work behind the scenes that you don't see. Usually, I'll meet with the guests ahead of time to do like a pre interview in order to figure out what topics we want to focus on. I also have a set of template questions that I use, but I always tailor that question to what the guest actually does day to day for work, or maybe they're just trying to do a personal branding. That's what keeps the conversation relevant and interesting, I think, when you tailor your interview question towards what the actual person is trying to share to the audience. The third type of format structure for a podcast is a mix of hybrid. So, this is a mix of your solo segments, your interviews, and sometimes even roundtable discussions. So, I've done solos, I've done interviews, but I have not done roundtable discussions. And part of it is because all my episodes are all audio. I do not have a fancy studio in order for me to have multiple guests and do a roundtable discussions. To really make the roundtable discussions work, you'll need more than one guest so it feels like a true roundtable discussion and worth the audience time. This is something that I would love to do though in the future. I'm not opposed to this. I just need a bigger space for this. So that's just my own problem. Number 4 are microcasts. So microcasts are your short, your 5 to 10-minute episodes. These are perfect for busy listeners who just want something quick and actionable. As much as I love my solo and interview episodes, I actually really enjoy the microcast shorty episodes because they're short, they're sweet, they're easier to record, they're easier to release, and they're great to mix into the content lineup, especially for people on the go. So if I'm busy, I will do like a shorty episode, add it into the lineup of episodes and call it a day. So to close out this segment for Life of a Business Manager podcast, we usually combine interviews with actionable how-to segments. And for 2026, we're going to continue doing that. I think we're going to bring on more interesting guests as well. And then in the future, I will look forward to doing a roundtable discussion. I think that would be a great podcast episode. But right now, our listeners love episodes where they can walk away with something practical and they can apply it right away. So it keeps the content useful, engaging, and it makes the show a lot of fun to produce. Okay, everyone, now that you've chosen your podcast format and structure, let's go into segment 4, which is to get your podcast equipment. So let's just talk about gear right now. So the good news is you do not need a fancy studio to start your podcast. You can have a simple, portable setup and still sound very professional. And honestly, in 2026, there are so many great tools out there that make this easier than ever. So let's go over some of the hardware tools. The first one is a mic, obviously. And here's what I recommend, and this is just from my experience if you're just starting out. To be honest with everyone, I purchased my mic on Amazon for like $60 and I still use it now till this day. I wouldn't say it's the best mic, but it is a great starting podcast mic and I didn't want to spend so much money. Possibly I'll probably get a new mic this year, but if you just want to get started, I wouldn't spend no more than $100 on a mic. For microphone recommendation, I will list some recommendation links down below in the show notes, and then you could click on whichever one you want to purchase. The second hardware are headphones. So you also want a good pair of headphones because if you do not live alone and you need to record your podcast, you definitely need a headphone so you don't disrupt the peace at home. Sometimes with a good pair of headphones, you can catch issues while you're editing early so you're not surprised later in your editing process. The third hardware is a laptop, and you want to make sure that you have the latest software upgrade in your laptop because it needs to be compatible with certain softwares with editing and recording purposes. From my experience for the last year of podcasting, I actually had to upgrade my laptop about 6 months into it. And the reason why is because the Mac that I was using was pretty old. It was from like 2010 for all I know. So let's go over the software now that we reviewed the hardware. For software, there's noise canceling softwares like AI tools such as Adobe Podcast Enhance or Descript Studio Sounds, which are game changers in order to cancel any noise. They also clean up background noise, improve clarity, and save you a ton of editing time. When it comes to recording platforms, there's tools. I use Riverside FM, but there's Squadcast, there's even Zoom AI Studio, which works very well. They make recording and publishing your episodes faster and way less stressful. All of these tools make a huge difference when you're trying to create your podcast. They help your audio sound cleaner, more polished, and just more professional overall. And they're pretty simple to use. And if you want to do your own research, feel free to. People are always searching for like the best podcast microphones, the budget-friendly equipment, and any like AI audio enhancement tools. But this is just a good starting list for you if you are looking to start a podcast in 2026. Okay, everyone, now that you have your podcast equipment, let's go into segment 5, which is writing your episode outline. So think of your podcast like you're telling a story. Even having a quick outline can make a huge difference when you're recording. And I'm just speaking from experience. It gives your episode structure, it helps you stay consistent without sounding scripted. I feel like a good outline, a detailed one, really helps you walk through the episode. Here's a simple framework that I like to use when I'm recording. Also, if you do the research on how to write an episode outline, it's very similar to what I'm going to share with you now. Let's get to it. Number 1, start with the hook. Let your listeners know why this topic matters and why they should stick around and continue listening to your episode. Number 2, move into your main teaching points. So these are like your meat of the episode. This is the core of what you want to share in this episode to your audience. Number 3, bring it to life with some examples, some stories, or even quick case studies if you have it. This is what makes the content relatable and memorable. So you want to make sure that the audience can relate to your episode. And if they can relate to their own life, they will continue to listen. Number 4, always include action steps. Give your listeners something they can actually do once the episode ends. Number 5, wrap it up with a clear to call action. Let them know what's next and how they can continue the conversation from your episode. So this is very important because you're trying to grow your podcast and trying to get more listeners, but you also want to make sure that the listeners are actually getting some sort of value in each of your episode. So I would say number 5 is very important, to call to action to your audience. So this is pretty much the blueprint that I use for every episode of Life of a Business Manager. It keeps me organized, helps me deliver real value episodes, and make sure my listeners walk away with practical takeaways that they can actually use in real life. Okay, everyone, let's wrap up this part 1 episode series on how to create your own podcast in 2026. Thank you so much for tuning into Life of a Business Manager podcast. If you found today's episode helpful, share it with another colleague, family, friends who might need some reminder in how to start their own podcast. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you have any questions about the role, suggestions for future topics, or stories of your own, I'd love to hear from you. You can find my email in the show notes below. As always, thank you so much for listening, and don't forget to subscribe. Until next time, everyone. Bye. Hi, everyone. Just a reminder, the content provided in our podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as professional advice. Listeners are encouraged to consult with appropriate professionals before making any business decisions based on the information provided in this podcast. We do not endorse any products or services mentioned unless stated in any of our episodes. Thank you for listening.